The mansion still stands on the edge of Savannah, Georgia. 3 stories of pristine white columns and hand-carved mahogany doors that gleam in the afternoon sun. Tour guides walk past it every day, pointing out its architectural perfection to crowds of tourists who photograph its facade and marvel at its symmetry. What they don't mention is that the man who designed every inch of it, who carved those doors with his own hands, who calculated every proportion down to the smallest fraction, never stepped inside. Not once. Not until the night his master died. And when they found him there the next morning, standing in the grand hall at dawn, surrounded by something no one could explain, the entire household fell silent. The authorities buried the story within 48 hours. The family burned most of the records. The newspapers never mentioned it, but the house remembers. The walls remember. And if you know where to look, the evidence is still there, hidden in plain sight. Before we continue with the story of the Grenville estate and the man who built it, I need you to do something for me. If this story gives you chills, if you want to hear more mysteries like this one, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. It helps the channel more than you know, and it lets me know you want more stories like this. Now let's go back to Savannah in 1852, where it all began. The truth is, nobody remembers his real name anymore. Not his birth name anyway. Savannah in the spring of 1852 was a city suspended between 2 worlds. Spanish moss draped from ancient oak trees like torn curtains, creating shadows that fell across cobblestone streets where wealth and suffering existed side by side, in a way that the inhabitants had long ago stopped questioning. The port brought ships from Charleston, New Orleans, Liverpool and beyond, carrying cotton bales stacked high on the docks, hogsheads of tobacco, indigo in wooden crates, and human cargo that arrived shackled in holds that still smelled of death weeks after they were emptied. In the historic district, townhouses rose like monuments to prosperity built on that suffering. Their gardens burst with azaleas and camellias that perfumed the humid air so heavily you could taste flowers on your tongue when you walked past. Wrought iron gates protected brick courtyards where fountains trickled, and wealthy families took their evening air, fanning themselves against the heat that pressed down like a wet blanket from April through October. The city hummed with commerce and contradiction. In the market squares, enslaved people sold vegetables they'd grown in whatever spare hours they could claim. In the parlors of Oglethorpe Square, ladies discussed literature and the latest fashions from Paris, while the people who cooked their food and washed their clothes remained invisible, present but unacknowledged. In the counting houses along Factor's Walk, men in tailored suits calculated profits while conveniently forgetting the source of their wealth. It was into this world that the Grenville family had arrived 3 years earlier, in the spring of 1849. They came from Charleston with considerable wealth accumulated from rice plantations along the Ashley River and shipping interests that connected Charleston to ports throughout the Caribbean. Marcus Grenville was 42 years old when he moved his family to Savannah. A tall man, with graying hair and eyes that never seemed to settle on anything for long. Always searching for flaws, for imperfections, for things that didn't meet his exacting standards. His wife, Catherine, was 36, a woman who had learned over 16 years of marriage to move quietly through her own home, to speak carefully, to manage her household with efficiency while remaining nearly invisible to her husband unless he specifically required her presence. She had given Marcus 3 daughters, Virginia, who was 14 when they arrived in Savannah, Margaret, who was 11, and Anne, who was 8. No sons, which Marcus considered one of Catherine's many failures, though he rarely spoke of it directly. He didn't need to. His disappointment lived in the silence between them. Marcus had come to Savannah with a very specific vision. He wanted to build a mansion that would eclipse every other home in the city, something that would cement the Grenville family's position among Savannah's elite, something that would make people forget they were newcomers from Charleston and instead see them as essential to the city's fabric. More than that, Marcus wanted perfection. He couldn't tolerate a crooked line, a mismatched corner, a proportion that felt even slightly off. This obsession had been with him since childhood, this need for everything to align exactly as it should. He'd hired his first architect within a month of arriving in Savannah. The man was well regarded, responsible for several notable buildings in the city. But when he presented his plans for the Grenville mansion, Marcus had rejected them immediately. The front portico was too narrow. The windows lacked proper proportion to the walls. The interior flow felt cramped. The architect had tried to argue to explain his design choices, but Marcus had simply dismissed him and hired another. The second architect lasted 3 months before Marcus fired him. The third made it to preliminary construction before Marcus halted everything, claiming the foundation measurements were wrong. The fourth, fifth, and sixth architects came and went in increasingly rapid succession, each one unable to satisfy Marcus's demands for perfection. Catherine watched this parade of hired and fired professionals with growing concern. The costs were mounting. Their standing in Savannah society, which should have been solidified by now, remained uncertain because they still lived in a rented townhouse rather than a home of their own. Worse, people were beginning to talk. Marcus Grenville was getting a reputation as impossible to please, perhaps even unstable. Virginia, their eldest daughter, was more direct in her assessment. "Father is going mad," she told her mother one evening in May of 1852. "Everyone says so. Elizabeth Harrington told me her father says Marcus Grenville has lost his mind over this house that will never be built." Catherine had no response to offer. She feared her daughter might be right. Then, on a humid afternoon in late April of 1852, everything changed. Marcus had heard rumors about a slave working in the Drayton Properties workshop. Several men at his club had mentioned the craftsman in passing, speaking of furniture pieces and decorative panels that showed unusual skill. One man, Thomas Havisham, had been particularly emphatic. "The carved mantelpiece in my library," he'd said over brandy and cigars. "I've never seen anything like it. Every detail perfect, every line precise. The man who made it has a gift that borders on uncanny." Marcus had pressed for details. Who was this craftsman? Where exactly could he be found? Could he draft or merely execute designs created by others? Havisham had shrugged. "He's one of Drayton's people. Been in that workshop for years from what I understand. As for drafting, I couldn't say. But I can tell you this. When I showed him a rough sketch of what I wanted, he understood immediately, didn't need explanation. It was as if he could see inside my mind to what I was imagining. And what he produced was better than what I'd envisioned." That was enough for Marcus. The next day he'd called for his carriage and directed the driver to the Drayton property. The workshop sat behind the main house, a long wooden structure with wide doors that stood open to let in light and air. The smell hit Marcus first. Fresh-cut wood, varnish, linseed oil, and sawdust. Inside, 3 men worked at different stations. Marcus's eyes swept past them, searching until they landed on a man in the far corner, working at a bench beneath a window. The man was tall and lean, perhaps in his early 30s, with dark skin and hands that moved with absolute precision as he shaped a panel of cherry wood. He wore simple clothing, rough cotton shirt and trousers, but he worked with the focused intensity of a surgeon. Around him, the bench was immaculately organized, tools arranged by size and function, sketches pinned to the wall, wood shavings swept into neat piles. Marcus approached slowly, not wanting to disturb the work. As he drew closer, he could see what the man was carving. A hunting scene rendered in relief. Dogs in mid-leap, their muscles tensed, every hair on their coat suggested by careful tool marks. Hunters on horseback, their clothing folding naturally with the movement of their bodies. Trees with individual leaves, clouds with texture and depth. The piece was destined for a cabinet door, but it was art. Real art. Marcus stood there for a full 5 minutes, watching. The carver knew he was there. His shoulders had tensed slightly when Marcus entered his space, but he didn't stop working. Didn't look up, just kept carving with steady, controlled movements. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Who did this?" The overseer, a squat man named Talbot with a red face and perpetually damp forehead, hurried over. "That's Nathan, sir. Been working here near about 8 years now. Does all our detailed work. Finest carver in Georgia, if you ask me." "Can he draft?" Marcus asked, his eyes never leaving the carving. Talbot hesitated, glancing at Nathan's back. "Sir, he's taught himself some. Draws out his designs before he carves them. Has to, for work this detailed." "Show me." Talbot looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Drayton ain't here presently, sir. I'm not sure I should be showing." Marcus pulled out his wallet and placed several bills in Talbot's hand. "Show me everything." Money had a way of resolving uncertainty. Talbot led Marcus to a corner of the workshop where Nathan kept his materials. There, carefully stored and protected from sawdust and moisture, were dozens of drawings, architectural sketches, floor plans, elevations of buildings that didn't exist, details of moldings, staircases, doorways, windows, all rendered in careful, precise lines with whatever materials Nathan had been able to acquire. Charcoal on scraps of paper, pencil on the backs of ruined documents, even designs scratched into pieces of flat wood. Marcus recognized immediately what he was looking at. This wasn't the work of a craftsman who could copy designs created by others. This was the work of someone who understood architecture itself, someone who could see a building complete in his mind and translate that vision into technical drawings. His hands trembled slightly as he went through the sketches. A plantation house with perfect Greek revival proportions. A church with a soaring steeple that seemed to defy gravity while remaining structurally sound. A library with built-in shelving designed to maximize space while maintaining elegance. None of these buildings existed, Marcus realized. They were all imagined, all created in Nathan's mind and captured on paper. "I want to buy him," Marcus announced, his voice tight. "Go find Drayton. Tell him Marcus Grenville wants to purchase Nathan. Today." Talbot's eyes widened. "Sir, Mr. Drayton sets considerable store by Nathan. I don't think. I'll pay double whatever Drayton thinks he's worth. Triple, if necessary. Go. Now." The negotiation took 3 days to complete. Drayton was indeed reluctant to part with his most skilled craftsman. But Marcus was persistent, and more importantly, he was willing to pay an amount that made refusal financially irresponsible. The final price was extraordinary. $2,000, nearly twice what Drayton had expected and far more than most skilled craftsmen would command. But for Marcus, it wasn't about the money. It was about finally getting what he needed. Someone who could transform his vision of perfection into reality. Someone with the skill to execute and the intelligence to design. Someone who could give him the mansion that 7 architects had failed to deliver. Nathan arrived at the Grenville property on May 1st, 1852. He came in the back of a wagon, carrying nothing but his tools, wrapped carefully in oiled cloth, and a small sack containing his few possessions. Marcus met him not in the house but in the rear garden, where a small building had been hastily converted into a private workshop. The building had been a carriage house once, but Marcus had ordered it emptied and fitted with workbenches, storage for materials, and windows that provided good light. It was better than most slave quarters, certainly better than Nathan had expected. Marcus stood in the doorway, backlit by the late afternoon sun. "I've seen what you can do," he said without preamble, without introducing himself or offering any courtesy. "I want you to design a mansion, my mansion. I want it to be the finest home in Savannah, perhaps in all of Georgia. I want every detail to be perfect, every measurement exact, every proportion ideal. Can you do that?" Nathan had set down his tools carefully before answering. He looked at Marcus directly, something that made Talbot, who'd accompanied him, draw in a sharp breath. But Marcus didn't seem to notice or care. "I can try, sir," Nathan said quietly. "Trying isn't good enough. I need certainty. I need to know that you understand what I'm asking for." Nathan held Marcus's gaze for a long moment. Then, "Yes, sir, I can do it. I can design what you're describing. I'll need time and materials, and I'll need you to tell me exactly what you want. but I can do it." Marcus smiled, though the expression didn't reach his eyes. It was a cold smile, satisfied but not warm. "Good. You'll work here, in this workshop. You'll have access to whatever materials you need for drawings and models. Paper, pencils, ink, whatever you require within reason. You'll draft the plans and I'll review them. When I approve the final design, you'll oversee the construction. You'll make sure every detail is executed exactly as drawn." He paused, and his voice dropped lower. "But understand this, Nathan. You will design this house. You will supervise its construction. You will ensure its perfection, but you will never set foot inside it. Not once. Not ever. You will see it only from the outside, only from doorways and windows. The mansion is not for you. It will never be for you. Do you understand?" Nathan's expression didn't change. "I understand, sir. One more thing," Marcus continued, pulling a document from his jacket. "Your name. Nathan is too common, and you came with no family name. From now on, you're Nathan Grenville. It'll make the paperwork simpler, and it'll establish that you belong to this household." He handed Nathan the document, a bill of sale with Nathan's new name already written in. Nathan took it, looked at his new name written in someone else's hand, and nodded once. Marcus turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I expect preliminary sketches within 2 weeks, floor plans within a month. Full architectural drawings within 3 months. Can you meet that schedule?" "Yes, sir." "Then we have an understanding." Marcus left, and Nathan stood alone in his new workshop, holding a piece of paper that declared him property of Marcus Grenville, while simultaneously giving him the task of creating something magnificent that he would never be allowed to experience from the inside. Talbot, still standing in the doorway, shook his head. "That's a strange arrangement, if you ask me. Building something you can't never enter. Seems like torture." Nathan carefully folded the bill of sale and placed it in his sack. "Perhaps," he said quietly. "Or perhaps it's an opportunity." "Opportunity for what?" Nathan didn't answer. He was already looking around the workshop, mentally cataloguing the space, planning where to set up his drafting table, where to store materials, how to organize the tools. His mind was already working on the problem Marcus had given him, already seeing possibilities, proportions, solutions. "Opportunity to build something that lasts," he finally said. "Something that outlives all of us." Talbot snorted. "You got a strange way of looking at things, Nathan Grenville." Nathan began unwrapping his tools, laying them out with careful precision. "Maybe so," he said, "but strange ways of looking at things sometimes see what others miss." The first 2 weeks were spent in preparation. Nathan needed to understand exactly what Marcus wanted, and Marcus, for all his demands for perfection, had difficulty articulating his vision. He knew what he didn't want. He'd rejected 7 architects' plans after all. But explaining what he did want proved more challenging. They met each evening in the workshop, Marcus pacing while Nathan sat at his drafting table, making notes and quick sketches. "I want grandeur," Marcus would say, "but not ostentation. Elegance, but not frivolity. I want people to enter the house and immediately understand that they're in the presence of something exceptional." Nathan would nod, his pencil moving across paper. "How many rooms, sir?" "Enough for entertaining. A ballroom, a proper dining room that can seat 20, drawing rooms, parlors, a library, upstairs bedrooms for family and guests, the usual domestic offices." "And the style, sir?" "Greek Revival is popular currently, but—" "Greek Revival," Marcus interrupted, "but done correctly. Most of these houses ape Greek temples without understanding the proportions. I want authentic Greek proportions, authentic understanding of classical architecture." This was useful information. Nathan began sketching column ratios, pediment angles, the mathematical relationships that made Greek architecture work. "The lot is here," Marcus said, unrolling a survey map. 3 acres. The house should be set back from the street, approached by a curved drive. Gardens front and back. The facade should face southeast to catch the morning light. Nathan studied the map, already visualizing the house in relation to the land. The way sunlight would move across it throughout the day, the sight lines from the street. Over the following weeks, the design began to emerge. Nathan worked from dawn until well past dark, sometimes forgetting to eat until someone from the main house brought him food. The initial sketches became more detailed drawings. The drawings became precise floor plans. The floor plans became elevations showing every exterior detail. Catherine occasionally watched from the upstairs windows of the rented townhouse, seeing lamplight burning in the workshop long into the night. She wondered what drove a man to work so intensely on something he would never truly possess, never truly experience. But she didn't ask. In her world, such questions were inappropriate. Marcus reviewed each drawing with obsessive attention, sometimes spending an hour examining a single sheet, checking measurements, verifying proportions. Most of the time, he found no faults. Nathan's work was precise, mathematically exact, aesthetically refined. But occasionally Marcus would point out some detail that didn't satisfy him, and Nathan would return to his workshop to revise. "The front portico," Marcus said during one review session. "The columns. You have them at 6 feet in circumference, correct?" "Yes, sir. Based on the height and the load they'll bear, 6 feet provides proper proportion according to—" "Make them 6.5 feet. The visual weight needs to be greater." Nathan paused, pencil hovering over paper. "Sir, that would throw off the ratio between 6.5 feet, Marcus repeated. "I know what I want." Nathan made the change, then spent the next 3 days recalculating every related measurement to ensure the proportions still worked. Increasing the column circumference meant adjusting the spacing, which affected the portico dimensions, which influenced the facade proportions, which required modifications to the window sizes and placements. It was like pulling a thread in a tapestry. One change rippled through the entire design. But Nathan made it work. He always made it work. By August of 1852, the complete architectural drawings were finished. Nathan had produced over 60 detailed sheets showing every aspect of the mansion. Floor plans for all 3 levels, 4 exterior elevations, sections showing interior heights and construction details, enlarged details of moldings and cornices, specifications for materials, even drawings of custom furniture pieces designed specifically for certain rooms. Marcus spent an entire week reviewing the complete set. He went through them in the workshop, spreading them across every available surface, moving from sheet to sheet, checking how details related to each other, verifying that everything worked together as a unified whole. Finally, on a Thursday evening in late August, as cicadas screamed in the trees and heat lightning flickered on the horizon, Marcus set down the last sheet and looked at Nathan. "It's perfect," he said quietly. "Every detail, every measurement. It's exactly what I wanted, even the parts I didn't know I wanted until I saw them drawn." Nathan felt something release in his chest, a tension he'd been carrying for months. "Thank you, sir." "Construction begins in September," Marcus continued. "I've contracted with Hollis & Sons for the building work. They're the best in Savannah, but you'll supervise. You'll be on site every day, checking every detail. Nothing gets built unless it matches these drawings exactly. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Marcus began rolling up the drawings carefully. "This house will make my reputation in Savannah. It will establish my family among the city's finest. People will talk about it for generations." He paused at the workshop door, the rolled drawings under his arm. "No one can know you designed it," he said, not looking at Nathan. "If anyone asks, the design is mine. You're simply a skilled craftsman executing my vision. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." "Good." After Marcus left, Nathan sat alone in the workshop, surrounded by the empty tables where his drawings had been spread. 4 months of work, 60 detailed sheets, hundreds of hours of calculation and design, all of it about to become Marcus Grenville's achievement. He should have felt angry, perhaps, or betrayed. But instead, he felt something else, a strange, quiet satisfaction. The house would be built, his design would become real, would take form in brick and wood and plaster. And while Marcus might claim credit for the concept, Nathan knew the truth. Every proportion, every detail, every subtle choice that made the design work. All of that came from his mind, his understanding, his vision. The house would be Marcus's in name and in law. But in every way that truly mattered, it would be Nathan's. He just had to make sure it was built perfectly. Construction began on September 15th, 1852, under skies that threatened rain but held off just long enough for the foundation ceremony. Marcus had insisted on a formal groundbreaking, inviting several prominent Savannah families to witness the beginning of what he promised would be the city's finest residence. Nathan watched from a distance as Marcus gave a short speech about classical architecture and the importance of beauty in civic life. He watched as Marcus ceremonially turned the first shovel of earth to polite applause from the assembled guests. Then the guests departed, the caterers cleaned up, and the real work began. Hollis and Sons had a crew of 20 men. Skilled craftsmen, laborers, and enslaved workers brought in for heavy work. The foreman, James Hollis, was a third-generation builder with a reputation for quality work and strict adherence to plans. He and Nathan understood each other from the first day. "These are your drawings?" Hollis asked, reviewing the architectural sheets in the site office. "Yes, sir." Hollis studied them for a long moment. "They're good. Very good. You have training?" "Self-taught, sir." Hollis looked at Nathan with new respect. "Self-taught. And you're how old?" 32, sir." "Remarkable." Hollis rolled up the drawings. "Well, Nathan, here's how we'll work. I'll run the crew and manage the construction schedule. But you'll check everything. Every measurement, every angle, every detail. If something's not right, you tell me immediately, and we fix it. I don't care if we have to tear out a day's work. Mr. Grenville's paying for perfection, and that's what we'll deliver. Agreed?" "Agreed, sir." And so the pattern was established. Nathan arrived at the construction site each morning at dawn and stayed until the light failed. He carried the drawings with him, checking every element as it was built. When the foundation walls went up, he verified that they were perfectly level, perfectly square. When the first floor framing began, he checked every joint, every measurement. The workers quickly learned to respect his eye. If Nathan said a wall was a quarter-inch out of plumb, a quarter-inch it was, even if it looked perfect to everyone else. If he said a beam needed repositioning, they repositioned it. Because when they checked with more precise instruments, Nathan was always right. "How does he do it?" One of the carpenters asked Hollis after Nathan had identified a foundation measurement error that was off by less than half an inch across a 30-foot span. Hollis shrugged. "Some people just have the gift. They can see what others can't. And Nathan's got it stronger than anyone I've worked with." But Marcus's rule remained absolute. Nathan could not enter the building. As the walls went up and the house began to take shape, Nathan developed techniques for inspecting work without crossing thresholds. He stood in doorways, leaning in as far as he could. He viewed interiors through windows from ladders and scaffolding. He examined upper floors by climbing the exterior framework before stairs were installed. The workers found it strange at first, this prohibition. But they adapted, learning to bring work to doorways for Nathan's inspection, to position materials where he could see them without entering. One afternoon in November, a plasterer named Reynolds questioned the arrangement. "Seems cruel," he said to Hollis, not knowing Nathan was nearby. "Man designs a palace and can't set foot in it. What kind of master does that?" "The kind that pays on time and wants perfection," Hollis replied curtly. "Mind your work and keep your opinions to yourself." But Nathan had heard. That evening, alone in his workshop, he thought about Reynolds' words. Cruel. Yes, perhaps it was. But cruelty had been the foundation of his entire life. He'd been born into bondage, had watched his mother sold away when he was 7, had learned his craft in stolen hours and hidden moments. Cruelty was nothing new. This, at least, this prohibition against entering the house, came with compensation. He got to design, got to create, got to see his vision take physical form. That was more than most enslaved people ever got, more than he'd ever expected, and besides, he had a plan. a way of making the house his own that Marcus would never suspect, never even see. He'd begun implementing it the moment construction started. It started with small things. Marks carved into foundation stones that would be buried beneath the house, invisible to everyone but there nonetheless. Specific measurements that held meaning beyond their structural purpose. Proportions that related to each other in ways that went beyond ordinary architecture. Nathan had been studying proportion and mathematical harmony for years. He'd read every book on architecture he could find, borrowing them secretly, reading by candlelight, memorizing principles of design that went back to ancient Greece and Rome. He understood that buildings could be more than just functional structures. They could embody ideas, could communicate through the language of space and form. The Grenville mansion would communicate, but only to those who knew how to listen. As the construction progressed through the fall and winter of 1852, Nathan built hidden elements into the structure, a hexagonal pattern of load-bearing points that formed a geometric design invisible to ordinary inspection, but critical to how weight distributed through the building. Window placements that aligned in specific ways, creating sightlines that formed meaningful patterns. Acoustic properties built into certain rooms through careful attention to proportions and materials, making sound behave in particular ways. In the main hall, Nathan designed the space so that a person standing at one specific point, the exact geometric center, could see into 6 different rooms simultaneously through carefully aligned doorways. From that same point, the acoustic properties allowed you to hear sounds from throughout the house with unusual clarity. Even the light would behave differently there, concentrated by window placements and reflective surfaces. As winter gave way to spring, the house's skeleton became covered with skin. Plaster covered the framing. Floors were laid. The grand staircase, Nathan's masterpiece, began its elegant curve upward from the main hall. Nathan carved the staircase balustrade himself, working in his workshop through cold winter nights. Each baluster was unique, decorated with acanthus leaves and flowering vines that seemed to grow organically from the wood. But hidden within the decorative carving were symbols, small marks that appeared to be random elements of the design, but weren't. A 6-pointed star here. A compass rose there. Geometric patterns that repeated in subtle variations. He carved these symbols into exactly 7 balusters, positioned at specific intervals. To anyone else, they would look like decorative variety. But Nathan knew they marked key points in the hidden geometry he was building into the house. The construction workers installed the balustrade without noticing these details. Why would they? The carving was beautiful, the installation precise. What did it matter if one baluster showed a slightly different flower pattern than another? But Nathan knew, and he documented everything. In his workshop late at night, he kept a separate set of drawings. Not the official architectural plans, but something else. Maps showing the hidden geometry. Diagrams explaining the proportional relationships. Notes describing the acoustic properties and sightlines. Calculations proving that everything worked according to principles most architects never considered. And he kept a journal. The journal began as simple construction notes, dates, materials used, problems encountered and solved. But gradually, it became something more personal. Nathan began writing about what it felt like to create something beautiful he couldn't fully experience. About standing in doorways, looking into rooms he'd designed, watching other people inhabit spaces that existed first in his imagination. May 3rd, 1853. The drawing room is finished. I stood at the threshold today and watched Mrs. Grenville take tea there with her daughters. The afternoon light came through the windows exactly as I calculated, warming the south wall, making the room glow. She smiled, enjoying the space without knowing I designed even that smile, created the conditions that made her feel comfortable enough to express joy. Is that power, or is it something else? September 17th, 1853. The grand staircase is installed. I watched men climb it today, testing its strength. Each step is exactly 7 inches high, 11 inches deep. The curve is mathematically perfect. From the main hall, it appears to float, to defy gravity, though of course it doesn't. It's just geometry and careful engineering. But it looks like magic. Marcus stood at the bottom and smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time since I've known him. He's pleased. He doesn't know he's pleased with my work, with my understanding of how to make stone and wood seem weightless. But he's pleased nonetheless. The journal grew thicker through 1853 and 1854. Nathan wrote about the peculiar isolation of creating something magnificent while remaining invisible, about overhearing guests praise Marcus's vision and taste, about the strange satisfaction of knowing the truth while letting others believe a lie. But he also wrote about the pattern, the hidden geometry, the secret architecture that existed beneath the visible one. November 12th, 1854. I've completed the 7th marker. 7 points forming a perfect hexagon, with the central point in the main hall. Anyone standing at that center can see all 6 surrounding points simultaneously through aligned doorways. The proportions create a harmonic space, a place where the mathematics of the building resolves into unity. Marcus will never know it exists, but it exists nonetheless. My signature, written in geometry instead of ink. By the summer of 1855, the mansion was nearly complete. The exterior was finished. Gleaming white columns, carved pediments, tall windows that caught the light. The interior was being furnished with pieces Nathan had designed and carved. Wallpaper from France covered the drawing room walls. Marble mantelpieces from Italy graced the parlors. Chandeliers from Paris hung in the ballroom. The Grenville family prepared to move in. Marcus walked through the completed house in early July, accompanied by his wife and daughters. Nathan watched from the garden as they toured their new home, seeing their reactions through the windows. Marcus nodded with satisfaction. Catherine smiled with what looked like genuine pleasure. The girls ran from room to room, exclaiming over details. That evening, Marcus came to the workshop. "It's perfect," he said simply. "Everything I wanted. Better than I imagined." "Thank you, sir. The grand opening will be July 20th. I'm inviting everyone who matters in Savannah. They'll see what I've accomplished." "What you've accomplished," Nathan thought but didn't say. "There'll be musicians in the ballroom, supper in the dining room, tours of the entire house. It will be the social event of the season." Marcus paused, seemed about to say something else, then changed his mind. "You've done excellent work, Nathan. I want you to know that, even if others don't know it, I do." It was the closest Marcus had ever come to acknowledging the truth. Nathan appreciated the gesture, inadequate as it was. "Thank you, sir." After Marcus left, Nathan sat in his workshop, surrounded by tools and sketches, and thought about the grand opening, about guests walking through rooms he'd designed but would never enter, about music playing in a ballroom whose acoustic properties he'd carefully calculated, about people admiring details he'd carved with his own hands. He could attend the party, of course. As part of the household staff, he'd be expected to help with preparations, to be available if anything needed attention. But he wouldn't be inside. He'd be in the gardens, in the service areas, anywhere but in the rooms that mattered. Still, he'd be able to watch, to see his creation functioning exactly as he'd intended, to witness the hidden geometry working even though no one else knew it was there. That would have to be enough. July 20th, 1855, dawned hot and humid, the kind of Savannah summer day where the air felt like warm syrup and Spanish moss hung motionless from the oak trees. But by evening, a breeze had picked up from the river, bringing relief and the promise of a beautiful night. Carriages began arriving at the Grenville mansion at 7 o'clock. Savannah's elite descended in silk and linen, jewels and polished boots. They came to see what Marcus Grenville had built, this mansion that had been 3 years in the making, this architectural marvel everyone had heard about. Nathan helped with preparations throughout the day. He checked that all the gas lamps were functioning properly. He ensured that the musicians had adequate space in the ballroom. He verified that decorative elements were secure, that nothing would embarrass the household. As evening fell and guests arrived, he retreated to the gardens. From there, standing among the camellia bushes and live oaks, he could see into the mansion through the tall windows, could watch guests moving from room to room, could hear music drifting out into the humid night air. The ballroom glowed with lamplight. Couples danced while musicians played in the gallery Nathan had designed specifically for that purpose. The acoustic properties worked perfectly. He could hear the music clearly even from the garden, the sound carrying exactly as he'd calculated. In the drawing room, ladies gathered to discuss the decor. Through the window, Nathan watched them admire the wallpaper, the cornices, the perfectly proportioned space that made conversation feel intimate even with 20 people present. In the dining room, supper was being served. Oysters from the coast, ham from local farms, vegetables prepared in the French style that Catherine preferred. Guests sat at a table Nathan had designed and built, its proportions calculated to seat 20 comfortably while maintaining conversational distance. Marcus moved through the rooms accepting compliments, describing his vision for the house, explaining design choices he'd never actually made. Nathan watched him gesture toward the grand staircase, heard him take credit for its elegant curve, for the carved balustrade, for the way it seemed to float upward. Catherine, standing nearby, caught Nathan's eye through the window. For a moment, their gazes held. Then she looked away, returning her attention to her guests. But Nathan had seen something in that brief glance. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe guilt. He couldn't be sure. As the evening progressed, Nathan found himself drawn to different windows, watching the house function exactly as he'd designed it to. Watching people respond to proportions and light and space in ways they didn't consciously understand. Watching his hidden geometry work its subtle magic. From the main hall window, he could see the central point, that exact spot where all the sight lines converged. Guests walked over it without knowing, stood on it while conversing, never realizing they were positioned at the geometric heart of the building. Around midnight, as the party began to wind down, Nathan saw Marcus lead a group of men on a tour of the upper floors. He watched them climb the staircase, saw them pause to admire the craftsmanship of the balustrade, saw them run their hands over carvings that Nathan had spent months creating, each one a small work of art, each one containing hidden meanings they would never decode. Thomas Havisham, the man who'd first told Marcus about Nathan's skills, stopped at one of the carved balusters, the one containing the first of the 7 hidden symbols. He examined it closely, tracing the pattern with his finger. Nathan tensed. Would he see it? Would he recognize that the pattern was more than just decoration? But Havisham simply smiled and nodded, then moved on. The symbol remained hidden in plain sight, protecting its secret. As the last carriages departed around 2 in the morning, Nathan remained in the garden. The house gradually fell silent. Servants cleaned up, lamps were extinguished. The family retired to their bedrooms. Finally, around 3 o'clock, Nathan returned to his workshop. He lit a candle and sat at his drafting table, looking at the sketches pinned to the wall. The house as he'd imagined it. The house as he'd designed it. The house that now existed in reality, occupied by people who would never know his name, never understand what he'd built into its very structure. He opened his journal and began to write. July 20th, 1855. The house is complete and inhabited. Tonight I watched my creation filled with life, with music and laughter and movement. Everything functioned as designed. Every proportion worked. Every detail pleased. Marcus accepts the credit, and I suppose that's his right as master and owner. But I know the truth. The house knows the truth. And perhaps that's enough. I stood at the central point today, during preparations, before the guests arrived. Stood there for a full minute experiencing what I've created. From that spot, the house reveals itself completely. 6 rooms visible simultaneously, 6 points of the hexagon aligned perfectly, sound and light, behaving exactly as calculated. It's beautiful. It's perfect. And it's mine in every way that truly matters, regardless of whose name is on the deed. Marcus can claim the visible architecture, but the invisible architecture, the real architecture, belongs to me. Nathan closed the journal and extinguished the candle. Outside, the mansion stood silent in the darkness, holding its secrets close. Life settled into a pattern after the mansion's completion. Marcus commissioned additional work from Nathan. Custom furniture pieces for specific rooms, decorative panels, built-in cabinetry, even a garden pavilion that echoed the mansion's architectural style. Each commission was executed with the same meticulous care as the original house. But Nathan's primary work shifted to commissions from other families. Word had spread, quietly, through the network of people who knew about such things, that the craftsman in Marcus Grenville's workshop produced exceptional work. Families throughout Savannah began requesting his services. A mantelpiece for the Davidson house, a mahogany sideboard for the Harringtons, carved panels for the lobby of a new bank building. Nathan worked steadily, earning money that Marcus kept in an account nominally belonging to Nathan, but actually controlled by Marcus himself. It was better than many enslaved craftsmen had, but it wasn't freedom. Catherine occasionally visited the workshop, bringing commissions from her friends, checking on progress for pieces Marcus had ordered. These visits were always brief and formal, but Nathan noticed that she seemed to genuinely appreciate the work. One afternoon in October of 1856, she lingered after inspecting a cabinet Nathan was building for the upstairs hallway. "May I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Of course, ma'am." "Do you ever resent it, the house?" Nathan set down his plane carefully before answering. "In what way, ma'am?" "Building something so beautiful and never being allowed inside. It seems—" She paused, searching for the word. "Cruel." Nathan considered this. "I've been inside, ma'am. During construction, I inspected every room from the doorways. I know every inch of that house. But you've never experienced it as it's meant to be experienced. Lived in, inhabited." "No, ma'am." "That's true." Catherine was silent for a moment. "I want you to know that I recognize your work, what you created, regardless of whose name is associated with it. Thank you, Mom." She turned to leave, then paused. "The house is perfect, Nathan. In every way. You should be proud." After she left, Nathan returned to his work, thinking about her words. Proud. Yes, perhaps he was. Despite everything, despite the injustice and the denial of credit, he had created something remarkable. Something that would last long after he was gone. The years passed with a rhythm that felt almost normal. Spring brought azalea blooms and new commissions. Summer brought heat and the slower pace of work in sweltering conditions. Fall brought relief and a surge of activity before winter. Winter brought cold workshops and hands that ached from carving in low temperatures. Nathan's reputation grew, though always quietly, always without official acknowledgement. Craftsmen throughout Georgia knew his name. Other enslaved workers looked to him as someone who'd achieved a kind of respect through sheer skill. But he remained property, remained bound to Marcus Grenville's household. Then, in the fall of 1859, the political situation began to deteriorate. Talk of secession filled parlors and meeting halls. Arguments about states' rights and federal authority grew heated. South Carolina was threatening to leave the Union. Georgia might follow. The future felt uncertain in ways that made even wealthy families nervous. Marcus became increasingly agitated. His shipping interests were threatened by northern boycotts. His investments in cotton were vulnerable to potential disruption. He spent long hours in his study, poring over financial documents, writing letters to business associates, trying to protect his wealth from the coming storm. And then, in October of 1859, Marcus fell ill. It began subtly, a persistent cough that Marcus dismissed as a minor annoyance. But the cough deepened, became wet and productive. Then came fever. Then weakness. By early November, Marcus was confined to his bed, unable to manage even basic business matters. Catherine summoned the best doctors in Savannah. They came with their black bags and serious faces, examining Marcus, prescribing treatments that ranged from reasonable to desperate. Bloodletting, mercury compounds, herbal tinctures, poultices. Nothing helped. The fever climbed. Marcus became delirious, calling out for his father who'd been dead 20 years, accusing invisible enemies of stealing from him, demanding that the house be built taller, grander, more perfect. Nathan continued his work during this period, but the atmosphere of the household changed. Servants moved with quiet urgency. Visitors came more frequently, speaking in hushed tones. The future felt suspended, waiting. On November 10th, Talbot came to the workshop with news. "Master's taken a turn for the worse," he said grimly. "Doctor says it might be days now, maybe less." Nathan set down his tools. "Thank you for telling me. Mrs. Grenville wants you to know that your work should continue regardless. She'll need furniture completed for several families. Says it's important to maintain obligations." Of course. But Nathan found it difficult to focus on work that evening. He kept thinking about Marcus, the man who'd owned him, the man who'd given him the opportunity to design something magnificent while simultaneously denying him credit for it, the man whose rule had been absolute, never enter the house. What would happen when Marcus died? Would the rule die with him? Would Catherine maintain it? Would it even matter? Nathan opened his journal that night but found he had no words. He sat staring at the blank page for an hour before finally closing the book and going to bed. Marcus lingered for 4 more days, fading gradually, his breathing becoming more labored. Catherine sat with him, reading aloud from the Bible and from poetry he'd once loved. The daughters took turns keeping vigil. The doctor came twice daily, though there was nothing more he could do. Marcus Grenville died at 3:17 on the morning of November 14th, 1859. Catherine was present, as was Virginia and the family doctor. The death was not unexpected, but it still sent a shock through the household. The man who'd built the Grenville family's position in Savannah was gone. The man whose vision, officially at least, had created the city's finest mansion. The man who'd ruled every detail of household life with exacting demands. Gone. Catherine took charge with composed efficiency. The funeral would be November 17th. In the meantime, mourning protocols must be followed. Mirrors covered, clocks stopped at the time of death, black crepe hung over doorways. Visitors must be received, condolences accepted, arrangements made. Nathan received the news from Talbot mid-morning on November 14th. He was working on a commission for a Charleston family, a dining table with elaborate carved legs. "Master Grenville's passed," Talbot announced without preamble. "Funeral's Thursday. You'll attend with the household staff." "Yes, sir." Talbot studied him for a moment. "You feel anything about it? Him dying?" Nathan considered the question honestly. "I'm not sure yet. He bought you, worked you hard, but treated you better than most. You had this workshop, good tools, respect for your work." "Yes," Nathan agreed. "All of that is true. But he never gave you credit for the house." "No." Talbot shook his head. "Strange arrangement, that. Always thought so. Man designs a palace and everyone thinks someone else did it." He paused. "Maybe now that'll change. Maybe Mrs. Catherine will tell people the truth." "Maybe," Nathan said, though he doubted it. After Talbot left, Nathan tried to return to his work but couldn't focus. His hands moved mechanically, but his mind was elsewhere, thinking about the mansion, about the rule that had governed his relationship to it for 7 years. Never enter. But Marcus was dead. The man who'd made the rule, who'd enforced it, who'd embodied it. Dead. Nathan set down his tools and walked out into the November afternoon. The air was cool, the light slanting low through the oak trees. He walked toward the mansion, stopping in the garden where he'd stood so many times before, looking at the house from the outside. From this angle, he could see the drawing room where Catherine often took her afternoon tea, could see the library, where Marcus had conducted his business, could see the ballroom that hosted parties Nathan attended only as invisible staff. His house, his design, his calculations made physical, but never his to enter. Until now, Nathan stood there as afternoon faded into evening, thinking about rules and death and boundaries, thinking about 7 years of creating beauty from the outside. 7 years of watching others inhabit spaces he'd imagined. The prohibition had been Marcus's. Would it survive Marcus's death? There was only one way to find out. Nathan didn't attend the evening meal. He remained in his workshop as darkness fell, sitting at his drafting table, not working, just thinking. Around 9 o'clock, Talbot came looking for him. "You all right?" Talbot asked, finding Nathan sitting in darkness without even a candle lit. "Yes." "You need anything?" "No, thank you." Talbot lingered in the doorway. "It's a strange time with Master gone. Everything feels uncertain." "Yes. You let me know if you need anything." After Talbot left, Nathan continued sitting in the darkness. He heard the household settling into its nighttime routine, heard voices fading, heard lamps being extinguished. The mansion grew quiet. Around 11 o'clock, Nathan stood. He walked to the door of his workshop, looked across the garden toward the mansion. Lamplight showed in Catherine's upstairs window. Otherwise, the house was dark. He should stay in the workshop, should respect the boundary even though the man who'd created it was dead, should wait to see what Catherine decided about the rule. But instead, Nathan found himself walking across the garden, found his feet carrying him toward the mansion's rear entrance, found his hand reaching for the door handle. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. During the day, servants moved constantly between the main house and the outbuildings. The door was only locked at night, and no one had thought to lock it yet during the disruption of Marcus's death. Nathan pushed the door open and stepped into the service hallway. He had crossed the threshold. For the first time in 7 years, he stood inside the house he'd designed. The sensation was strange, disorienting. He knew this space intellectually, had drawn every detail of it, but experiencing it physically was different. The hallway extended before him, its proportions exactly as he'd calculated. His feet made soft sounds on floors he'd specified. The air had a particular quality he'd created through careful attention to ventilation and spatial design. Nathan moved forward slowly, deeper into the house. He passed through the service areas toward the main hall. Each step felt momentous, laden with significance. When he emerged into the grand hall, he stopped. The space was magnificent in the moonlight streaming through the tall windows. The grand staircase curved upward, its balustrade, his balustrade, creating elegant shadows. The proportions were perfect. The acoustic quality was exactly as designed. Even in darkness, even in silence, the space communicated harmony, balance, mathematical precision made tangible. Nathan walked to the center point, the exact geometric heart of the building, the place where all his hidden calculations converged. He stood there and slowly turned, looking at everything. The plasterwork he'd specified, the cornices he'd designed, the way the staircase split and curved, the aligned doorways that allowed sightlines into 6 different rooms. It was exactly as he'd imagined. Exactly. 7 years of seeing it only from outside, of experiencing it only through doorways and windows and second-hand descriptions, and now, finally standing inside it, he found that reality matched his vision perfectly. "Nathan," he turned sharply. Catherine stood at the top of the staircase, wrapped in a dark robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. She must have heard him enter, must have come to investigate. They looked at each other across the vertical space of the hall. Nathan should have run, should have apologized, should have retreated immediately to his proper place. But he stood his ground. Catherine descended slowly, her hand on the balustrade he'd carved. She reached the ground floor and crossed the marble he'd selected, stopping a few feet from where he stood at the central point. "I heard someone moving through the house," she said quietly. "I thought perhaps—" She didn't finish the sentence. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I shouldn't have entered. I'll leave now." "Wait." She looked around the hall, seeing it from his perspective, perhaps. "How does it feel? Seeing it from the inside?" Nathan was silent for a long moment. "It's exactly as I imagined," he finally said. "Every proportion, every detail. The way sound moves through the space, the way light falls through the windows during the day, I can imagine it even now in darkness. Everything is as it should be." Catherine moved to the center point herself, standing where Nathan had stood. "What's special about this spot? You're standing here so deliberately." Should he tell her? Should he reveal the hidden geometry he'd built into the house? Nathan found himself speaking before he'd made a conscious decision. "It's the geometric center of the building. From this exact spot, you can see into 6 different rooms through aligned doorways. The acoustic properties are optimized here. You can hear sounds from throughout the house with unusual clarity. Even the light concentrates here at certain times of day, reflected and focused by window placements and wall angles." Catherine turned slowly, looking through the doorways he'd indicated. "I never noticed. I've stood here dozens of times and never noticed. Most people wouldn't. It's subtle, intentional but hidden. What else have you hidden in this house?" Nathan hesitated. But Marcus was dead. The prohibition was broken, and Catherine was asking, genuinely curious. "There are 7 markers carved into decorative elements throughout the house," he said. 7 points that form a perfect hexagon, with this spot at the center. The proportions between rooms follow specific mathematical ratios. The mansion has a hidden geometry underlying the visible architecture. "Why?" "Because it's mine," Nathan said simply. "The only part of this house that truly belongs to me. Marcus could claim credit for the visible design. But the invisible design, the real architecture, that's mine. My knowledge, my understanding, my mark on the world." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I found your journal. The one you'd hidden behind a panel near the staircase." Nathan's stomach dropped. The journal. He'd forgotten about the journal. "I've read it," Catherine continued. "All of it. Every entry. I know about the pattern, about the calculations, about everything you built into this house." "Ma'am, You wrote something in the last entry," she interrupted. "You wrote, 'Tomorrow it ends,' or 'Tomorrow it begins.' What did you mean?" Nathan remembered writing that. The day before Marcus died, he'd felt something shifting, something changing. As if Marcus's approaching death represented a boundary, a threshold. "I meant that Master Grenville's death would either end my relationship with this house or transform it. That the rule against entering would either become permanent, enforced by others after he was gone, or it would die with him. And tonight, coming here, was that your answer?" "I suppose it was." Catherine walked to the staircase, placed her hand on the carved balustrade. "Marcus took credit for something you created. He accepted praise that belonged to you. He made a rule that seemed designed to punish you for being more talented than he could be." "Yes, ma'am. I should be angry at you for violating that rule, for entering without permission. Yes, ma'am. But I'm not." She looked at him directly. "You built something remarkable, Nathan. Something that will last long after all of us are gone. You deserve to see it, to experience it, at least once." Nathan felt something release in his chest. "Thank you, ma'am." They stood in silence for a moment, then Catherine moved toward the staircase. "I should return to bed. There's much to do tomorrow with the funeral arrangements." "Of course." She paused with her foot on the first step. "Nathan, you're welcome to come back, to see the house. Not during the day when there are servants and visitors, but at night when it's quiet. You should know what you created." "Ma'am, I don't think—" "I'm serious. You built it. You should experience it. Consider it payment for 7 years of denied credit." She climbed the stairs and disappeared into the upper hallway, leaving Nathan alone in the central hall. He stood there for another few minutes, processing what had happened. Then he walked through the main floor slowly, looking into rooms, experiencing spaces he'd only seen from doorways. The drawing room, the library, the dining room, the ballroom. All of it exactly as he'd imagined, all of it perfect. Finally, around 2 in the morning, he returned to his workshop. But something had changed. Some fundamental boundary had been crossed, and Nathan knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be quite the same. The funeral took place on November 17, 1859, under grey skies that threatened rain but held off. Marcus was buried in Laurel Grove Cemetery with full honors. his grave marked by a substantial marble monument. The service was well attended, Savannah society turning out to pay respects to a man who'd contributed to the city's architectural heritage. At least, that's what the eulogist said. Marcus Grenville will be remembered for his vision, for the magnificent home that stands as a testament to his understanding of classical beauty and proportion. Nathan, standing with the household staff at the back of the gathering, listened without expression. After the burial, the family hosted a reception at the mansion. Mourners filed through rooms Nathan had designed, speaking in hushed tones about Marcus's accomplishments and the uncertain times ahead. Virginia, now 24, and engaged to a shipping merchant's son, played the role of grieving daughter with practiced grace. Margaret and Anne, younger and less controlled, showed genuine distress. Catherine moved through it all with composed dignity, accepting condolences, managing details, being the widow society expected her to be. Nathan helped with preparations but stayed out of sight during the reception itself. He worked in the service areas, ensuring everything ran smoothly, remaining invisible as always. But that evening, after the last guests had departed, Virginia made a discovery that would complicate everything. She'd gone to Marcus's study to begin sorting through his papers. The room had been his sanctum, the place where he'd conducted business and kept his private records. Virginia found the key to his locked desk drawer among his personal effects, and curiosity drove her to see what her father had considered important enough to secure. Inside were the expected documents: property deeds, investment records, correspondence with business associates. But beneath these items was a leather portfolio tied with string. Virginia opened it and found herself looking at Nathan's architectural drawings. All of them. Every preliminary sketch, every revised plan, every detailed drawing. 60 sheets documenting the complete design process of the mansion. And in the corner of each sheet, in small, precise handwriting, was a signature: Nathan Grenville. Virginia stared at the signature, understanding slowly dawning. Her father hadn't designed the house. Nathan had. Her father had claimed credit for work that belonged to someone else. She brought the portfolio to her mother. Catherine looked through the drawings in silence, her expression growing more troubled with each sheet. "Did you know about this?" Virginia asked. Catherine set the drawings aside carefully. "I knew Nathan did the actual work. Your father was quite open about that, at least in private. But I didn't realize your father had kept the original drawings. I assumed they'd been destroyed or lost. These prove father lied. About the design, about his vision, about everything." "Yes." Virginia sat down heavily. "What should we do with them?" Catherine was silent for a long moment. "I don't know." But the question became more complicated later that evening, when a housemaid made another discovery. While cleaning the main hall, she'd found something behind a decorative panel near the grand staircase. A small cavity in the wall, and inside it a notebook. The maid brought it to Catherine, who opened it with trembling hands. It was Nathan's journal. The journal Catherine had told him she'd found and read. But now she realized there were two journals. The one she'd found before was different. Smaller, less detailed. This one was larger, more comprehensive. Catherine read it alone in her sitting room as November darkness fell outside her windows. The entries began in May 1852 and continued through November 13th, 1859, the day before Marcus died. The journal documented everything: the design process, construction challenges, the strange satisfaction and frustration of creating something beautiful while remaining invisible. But this journal went further than the first one. It described the hidden geometry in specific technical detail. It explained the purpose of each symbol, each calculated proportion, and it revealed something Catherine hadn't fully understood. Nathan had created a complete secondary architecture within the mansion, invisible to everyone but him. A language written in space and light and mathematical proportion. One passage, dated March 1858, was particularly revealing. "The house is a text, written in the language of geometry. Most people read only the surface. Beautiful rooms, elegant proportions, pleasing details. But there's a deeper text beneath that surface, accessible only to those who understand the mathematics. I've written my autobiography in this house. Every calculation reflects something I believe about order and beauty. Every proportion embodies an idea I couldn't speak aloud. The house is my voice, finally given form. Catherine closed the journal and sat in the darkness thinking. Nathan had built his mind into the structure of her home. His understanding, his vision, his very thoughts were embedded in the walls and floors and ceilings, and she'd been living inside his mind for 4 years without knowing it. The next morning, she made a decision. She called for the estate lawyer and had new papers drawn up. Nathan would be freed, and the workshop property would be deeded to him. Georgia law made straightforward manumission difficult, but with the lawyer's help, they found a legal framework that would grant Nathan protected status and independent ownership of the workshop. When Catherine informed Nathan of the decision 3 days later, he listened without visible emotion. "Why?" he finally asked. "Because you created something remarkable," Catherine said, "and because you deserve to own at least the place where you created it, even if you can't own the creation itself. What about the house, the drawings, your husband's reputation? What about them? Will you tell people the truth, that I designed it?" Catherine was silent for a long moment. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Part of me wants to. Part of me wants to give you the credit you deserve, to correct the false story that's been told. But part of me worries about what that would do to my family's standing, to Marcus's legacy, to my daughter's prospects." So the lie continues. "Perhaps. For now. I'm sorry." Nathan accepted the papers granting him freedom and property ownership. He didn't thank her, didn't express gratitude, just took the documents and returned to his workshop. But something fundamental had changed. He was no longer property. The workshop was his. And the mansion remained what it had always been, his creation, even if the world didn't know it. As 1860 dawned, bringing with it the political tensions that would soon erupt into civil war, Nathan continued working in his workshop. Now as a free man, technically, now as the owner of his own space. Word continued to spread about his skills. Commissions came from families throughout Savannah and beyond. He never advertised, never sought clients actively. But those who knew, who understood quality, sought him out. But he changed after Marcus's death and his own manumission. He was quieter, more withdrawn. He worked with the same precision, but something essential had shifted. It was as if, having finally stood at the center of his creation and confirmed its perfection, having finally had his work acknowledged at least by Catherine, he'd reached some kind of completion. He never built another complete building, never designed another house. When asked why, he simply said he'd already created what he wanted to create. One perfect mansion was enough. Catherine occasionally saw him in the evenings, standing in the garden, looking at the mansion. She never approached him during these moments, sensing that his relationship with the house had become something deeply personal, something beyond her understanding. The war came in 1861, bringing disruption and change to everything. The Grenville household, like so many others, found its world transformed. Virginia's engagement ended when her fiancé enlisted and died at Shiloh. Margaret married a Confederate officer who returned from Gettysburg missing an arm. Anne never married at all, devoting herself to helping her mother maintain the mansion through increasingly difficult years. But through it all, the mansion stood. Its perfect proportions and hidden geometry holding meanings that only one man fully understood. Nathan lived until 1883, continuing to work almost until the end. He never married, never left Savannah, never built another complete structure. The workshop became his world, filled with tools and sketches and projects. When he died at the age of 61, he left no will and no immediate family. The workshop and its contents were sold off to pay debts. his tools scattered across Georgia, ending up in the hands of craftsmen who never knew their origin. But before he died, Nathan did one final thing. It was 1882, a full year before his death. Catherine had been gone for 7 years by then, and the mansion had passed to Virginia's son, Marcus II, named for the grandfather he'd never met. The young man knew the mansion's official story, his grandfather's vision, his grandfather's achievement. Nathan, now 60, and feeling his age, sent a letter to the house requesting permission to visit one final time. Marcus II, curious about the old craftsman's request, granted it. Nathan arrived on a cool October afternoon, walking slowly, his joints stiff with age. Marcus II met him at the door. "Mr. Grenville," the young man said formally, "you wish to see the house?" "Just the main hall, sir, if that's acceptable." "Of course, though I'm curious why, after all these years." Nathan didn't explain. He simply walked to the central point, that exact geometric heart of the building, and stood there. He turned slowly, taking in everything he'd created more than 30 years earlier. The plasterwork, still perfect. The cornices, still elegant. The grand staircase, still seeming to float despite its solid construction. The proportions, still harmonious. The hidden geometry, still functioning exactly as designed. The house servants who witnessed it later said he smiled, the only time any of them had seen such an expression on his face. "It's still perfect," Nathan said quietly, speaking to himself more than to Marcus II. "After all these years, still exactly as it should be." Marcus II watched with puzzlement. "You seem very familiar with the house, Mr. Grenville." Nathan looked at the young man. "I built it. All of it. The design was mine." What? "No, my grandfather designed this house. Everyone knows." "Your grandfather claimed credit for my work," Nathan said calmly, "but I designed every inch of it, every proportion, every detail. I have proof, if you ever want to see it. Drawings, journals, documentation." Marcus II's face reddened. "That's absurd. You're making claims you can't possibly—" "I'm not making claims," Nathan interrupted. "I'm stating facts, but it doesn't matter anymore. The house exists, it's beautiful, it will outlast both of us. That's what matters." He walked to the door, paused to look back one final time. "Thank you for letting me see it," he said. "One last time." Nathan returned to his workshop and never left it again. He died in his sleep that winter, on a cold January night, surrounded by tools and unfinished projects. Marcus II tried to verify Nathan's claims, searching through family papers. He found the portfolio of drawings in his grandfather's study, found documentation that supported at least part of Nathan's story. But by then, Nathan was dead, unable to provide further details or evidence. Marcus II made a decision. The official story would remain unchanged. Marcus Grenville had designed the house. To say otherwise would damage the family's reputation, would raise uncomfortable questions about the past. The drawings were returned to storage. The story was allowed to continue. The mansion still stands today, in the heart of historic Savannah. It survived the Civil War, survived Reconstruction, survived economic collapse and recovery, survived fire and storm, and the slow deterioration of time. It's been restored multiple times, each generation finding new reasons to preserve it. Tour guides walk visitors through its halls, pointing out the elegant proportions, the masterful craftsmanship, the perfect Greek revival style. They speak of Marcus Grenville's vision and taste. Some of the more knowledgeable guides mention that enslaved craftsmen did much of the actual work, though names are rarely given. Very few people know about the journals, which rest in private collections, their contents never published. Fewer still know about the hidden markers, the secret geometry, the invisible architecture that exists beneath the visible one. But on certain evenings, when the light comes through the tall windows at just the right angle, you can stand in the central point of the main hall and look around. And if you know where to look, if you understand what you're seeing, you can read the map that Nathan Grenville left behind. A map written in proportion and light. A map that says, "I was here." I understood. I created a map that says, "This is mine." Regardless of whose name you speak, the house remembers, even if no one else does. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Do you think stories like this should be told? Should we remember the people whose names were erased from history, whose work was claimed by others? Drop a comment and let me know what you think. And if you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button. These hidden histories need to be heard. Thanks for listening. Until next time.